Hi, and welcome to episode 52 of the eCHO live stream, eBPF and Cilium office hours. I'm Liz Rice, and today we're going to be talking about some interactive Cilium labs for learning about how to use Cilium. As always, use the comments to let us know where you're watching from and to ask questions. It's always great to know that you're out there and to hear your points of view. So, some good news this week, eBPF Summit. We've got the dates. It's going to be September the 28th and 29th. It will be virtual, just the same as for the last couple of years. So register, sign up now, click on the link so that you don't miss any news about what I am confident is going to be a really fun couple of days of eBPF related content. Also, if you have stories to tell, we would absolutely love you to submit your ideas. So a little bit further down this page, there is the send proposal button, and that will take you to our call for speakers page. So get thinking. You have, I believe, until I think you have a couple more weeks rather, of time to think up your eBPF stories that you'll submit to the eBPF Summit. So there's a couple of other headlines that we want to bring to your attention this week, and nice, interesting articles that people have published. This is a really nice story from Cloudflare about using eBPF and specifically eBPF programs attached to the LSM interface for live patching security vulnerabilities. This one is about privilege escalation, so that's pretty interesting. As always, you'll find the links to all of these things on the show notes, which I think is in that corner. You should see hackmd.io/@echo live. And if you go there, you'll find all the links that you can click on. You can also, while you're watching live, if there are things that we refer to and you think we should include them in the notes, you can update them there. We do also publish these notes on the eCHO GitHub repo as well. Okay, so the next article that we've highlighted this week is from Google. They are using eBPF in GKE Autopilot. So GKE Autopilot now has IP masquerading and an eBPF data plane. That eBPF data plane is based on Cilium. It's the Google data plane v2, which is based on Cilium, and we had the pleasure of Purvi from Google joining us at KubeCon in our Cilium maintainers session, talking about how much they're contributing to the project and how valuable they find it in the data plane for GKE. Okay, so there's a few people watching to say hello to. Hi to Quentin, who, as always, is the person who helps put together all these headlines. So appreciate your help there, Quentin. Marga is with us. Hi, Marga. Nice to have you with us. And yeah, I feel your pain here, Russell. Hello from a country with a government in turmoil. Yeah, it's been hard to get work done with all the excitement in British politics this week. Yeah, if you are also joining from a country that may or may not have a prime minister this week, do let us know. Back to the eBPF headlines. There's an article here. Oh, I've clicked on the link there rather than bring it up here. This is an article from the Apache Skywalking project. And they're using eBPF to do continuous profiling. So this is pretty similar to what we heard from the Parker project a few eCHO episodes ago. But it's really great to see eBPF being used for performance monitoring in lots of different projects. The last link that I wanted to share this week is asking for your input. This is the final call for feedback on Cilium Service Mesh. We are going to be doing a release in 1.12, and we'd love to get some feedback, thoughts on how you've been finding Cilium Service Mesh before we push that to stable in the 1.12 release. So that's going to be pretty exciting from the Cilium point of view. Now let's turn to I'm going to bring in my guests. So let's welcome Nico and Raphaël, and let's rearrange the screen a bit. So Nico and Raphaël both work with me at Isovalent. Welcome to eCHO. Why don't you introduce yourselves? Let's start with Nico.
Hi, so hi, I'm Nico. I'm a senior technical marketing engineer at Isovalent, and my role really is to help users adopt Isovalent. So by creating content like blog posts and videos and also some online labs.
Wonderful. And Raphaël?
And I'm Raphaël Pinson. I'm a senior solutions architect at Isovalent. So I work in between customer success, content, including the labs, and internal testing, dogfooding, essentially.
Yeah, you get the pleasure of working directly with customers and folks who are using Cilium in the field. So I think you probably get a lot of really great insights into,
feedback,
what challenges they have and how we can solve their problems. So, welcome to the show, both of you. We wanted to talk today about some interactive labs that you've both been working on to help people in their journey learning about Cilium. So, Nico, shall I add your screen into the mix? Is now a good time?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So thanks Liz for having us. What we've done a few weeks ago now, we launched our online hands-on labs, which you can find on isovalent.com/labs. And we've already had hundreds of people trying them out, playing with them. We've had some fantastic feedback. And really the idea is really to make it super easy for anybody to go and jump in on a environment for them to deploy, test, and play around with Cilium. Right? Just really make it as easy as possible. And look at the Cilium docs are pretty comprehensive. You have guides to install Cilium on pretty much any kind of Kubernetes service, managed service, that kind of stuff. But we can't cover every single scenario. And really what we wanted is to be able to give folks the opportunity to just jump in, click a button, and get started with the labs, which is what you've got here.
Fantastic. And I think it's a really great idea. People don't then have to be thinking about setting up that environment. They can just dive straight into the Cilium part, which is the point.
Yeah.
I feel like we should point out, although it talks about Cilium Enterprise, there's plenty of labs in here that are open source focused as well, right?
Yeah, of course. And we, you can see we have a few labs already, 6 of them available, and we have more in the pipeline, and we'll talk about this a bit later on. But we've got this getting started with Cilium OSS, which is probably the most popular. But we also have some around cluster mesh, some around more focus on eBPF. And yes, you have a few around Cilium Enterprise as well for some of the more advanced features.
That eBPF one looks familiar to me. I was involved in building that one. Oh, this is fantastic. So we have Bojan Che, whose name I think I mangle every week. Thanks for joining us. And he has already tried one of these labs. So that's wonderful. We would love to hear how that went. And brilliant. A couple more people who've said hi. We have Randax100 who said hi. And Tam. Hello to Tam, for whom it's probably the middle of the night. Okay. Actually, we do have a question already. Why is there no way to go back after submitting the task? Maybe this is something we should come back to when we talk a bit more about how the labs are structured. So I'm going to say we'll come back to that question, Vajanshe.
That's good.
Should we kick off one of these labs and take a look so people can see?
Yeah, so what you simply have to do is once you pick the lab of your choice, and then just have you put your details in, and then you get your lab environment, we use a platform called Instruct to run our online labs. And you'll see some, it takes a few minutes for the labs to boot up. You see a number of commentary here to talk about what the lab is going to be about. But the idea really is to make it quite interactive, easy to deploy, quite fun, hopefully, and reasonably short. Hopefully within 20-25 minutes you've completed the lab. Depends on some of the labs, but you can learn a great deal in a relatively short amount of time. So this one is so Cilium getting started, where we start with a kind of environment, and we follow through a number of steps to go and essentially deploy Cilium in a fresh on a cluster deployed by kind.
So this, I mean, it's deployed into Instruct's sandbox environment. So that's a virtual machine, right?
Yeah. So there are actually a few different configuration types, and we can actually deploy in different clouds. What we're using is Google, right? Raphaël has spent more
Google
time.
Cloud.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize we get to choose the backend where it's hosted. That's interesting.
Yeah. So you have the choice between either virtual machines, and you can choose which one. So we're using Google Cloud. But you can also deploy individual containers. And so you can have, for one lab, you could potentially have several machines, several containers, put everything together. What we've chosen, because so far it's worked for us, is to have one virtual machine where the users are connected, and then everything is done using containers. So typically using kind for the Kubernetes clusters.
Great. So we can see here there's a 3-node cluster by the look of it, but those are
exactly
they're kind, and they're all running in containers. That makes sense.
Yeah. And as you can see, like once we have a set of different tasks within each lab, and after you've completed each task, we run some internal checks to make sure that the user has completed the task correctly, and then before we move on to the next one. But again, it's guided, so if you run into an issue, we'll give you some indication of what the problem might be, so you don't get stuck for.
Okay, so if you actually don't complete the task correctly, will it prevent you from going forward?
I guess it depends on some of those labs we've done.
Ideally, yes, that's the idea. So the checks are pretty simple most of the time. But to give an example, just recently we had a summer school. We'll talk about this. It was a cluster mesh lab, and the check was actually checking that cluster mesh was activated, but not that the clusters were meshed with each other. And for some reason, there's 1 or 2 students that actually didn't mesh the clusters, and they continued, and it didn't work as expected. And so I actually patched the check to make sure that the clusters were meshed with each other. But it's essentially script, so we can check whatever we want.
Right. Yeah. I think this is pretty interesting about this environment, that we get to write code. It's like learning as code, or learning platform as code, and we get to write the definition of what's the environment that's running, and each of the tasks and the checks all the way through. It's all kind of code, right?
Yeah. And the nice thing was this, that we have the checks on one side, but we can also have scripts for the solving, which allow either to skip the steps. So here we haven't activated the skip option, but you can actually activate the skip option so that you can skip the challenges, and it will solve it itself. But we can also use this to test the labs. So it will just, for every challenge, it will prepare the challenge. So there's a script for setting up the challenge, so every step. And then it will run the check script and check that it actually doesn't pass. And it will run the solve script, and then run the check script again and check that it passes. So we can actually test from beginning to end the tracks.
Sure. And I think kind wasn't the only approach we've tried for running Kubernetes clusters and then having Cilium on them, right? I think there was some experiments with K3S.
Yeah, so originally the first labs were on K3S. The Cilium open source lab was running on K3S just because that was the main option, and the examples provided by Instruct were on K3S actually. But then I actually encountered a few issues with K3S, namely because what happens is that we build an image for Google. So we use our own Google account for this, for building the image. So we start a virtual machine on Google Cloud, and then we installed K3S, and then we would install Cilium or Cilium Enterprise on it, Isovalent Cilium Enterprise on it. And then once this was done, we would turn off the machine and create an image from it. And then when users start the lab, it just starts a new instance of this image. And the problem we had is that in some cases, I started seeing that Cilium didn't work well with this. And the reason was that Cilium would start too fast before K3S realized that the IP addresses of the machine had changed. And so it was listening on an IP address that actually didn't exist anymore, because it based itself, there's the Kubernetes node resources, and Cilium has its own Cilium node resources, and they were not synchronized. So K3S would update the node resources, but Cilium had already started with its own version that had the old IP addresses. So in order to avoid this, I refactored the labs using Kind, so that we have a clean environment every time. So it takes a little bit longer to start, but at least we know that it's clean.
Right. So we have to give the user, the learner, a few more learning steps or a few more things to read while it's warming up in the background, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So we had a challenge to look at the environment and check the nodes and things like this. The great benefit of this is that we have more flexibility because we can start different kinds of kind clusters. So we sometimes have kind clusters with just one node, or with 3 nodes, or with different options. Or in the case of cluster mesh, for example, we have 2 kind clusters that are started in parallel, and then we mesh them, which if we had K3S would be much more complex or would require several virtual machines.
Right. So we can actually run 2 kind clusters on the same virtual machine, each of them with some number of nodes. Yeah, it makes sense. So I can see there's we're at an interesting point in that challenge where we've got a quiz here. I feel like we should try and answer the quiz.
Pressure is on. Right.
All right. So this is about installing Cilium. This is talking about the Cilium CLI allows us to, and we have to pick all the things that we can do.
All right, you have to help me out here.
All right. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that you can use Cilium CLI to install a Cilium on a cluster and to check the status. But I don't believe we can use the Cilium CLI to install Kubernetes. So let's go with that.
Not yet, at least.
Boom. Okay. Hooray. Great. And I think a lot of this this particular lab is walking through some of the getting started guide that we already had in the docs, right? So I guess that was the inspiration for some of these labs.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the priorities really have been taking the getting started docs. We had for quite a while, we had an install fest regular event, and people would choose to install either on Minikube or on Kind or K3S. But then there were problems, because some people got issues on their own machine using K3S or Minikube. And it became more of like Minikube specific or Kind specific or K3S specific issues. And so having these labs actually allow people to just focus on installing Cilium or testing eBPF or just this subject without, in an environment that is quite controlled.
Right.
And so a lot of them are taken. Yeah.
Sorry,
so a lot of them are or will be taken from the getting started docs.
Yeah. And those docs still, that's still a valid way. And if you want to work through those docs, that's totally appropriate. But I guess we're just avoiding the possibility of having to debug some K3S installation issue or some problem running on a particular, I don't know, virtual machine combo with K3S. Yeah. All right. So if we walk through a bit more of this demo, I guess we will get to the CLI. So this is the CLI environment that you get. This is, a CLI into that Instruct virtual machine. Tell us a bit about that CLI environment and, how you've kind of had to tune it, perhaps.
Yeah, so this one is not tuned, actually. So this is the basic CLI that is provided by Instruct. But in some cases, it's been useful to actually modify it. And I don't know, maybe in the future, we'll just use another CLI for all the labs. The one lab where it was necessary to have a different CLI was the cluster mesh lab. I don't know, maybe it's just me because I'm used to have, my ZSH environment with all the information and the icons and the prompt and so on. So I'm a bit lost if I don't have all this. But for the cluster mesh environment, we have two clusters, and there's comments that are issued either on one cluster or the other. And so it's very important to know which cluster you're on at a given moment. And so we use the Starship prompt.
I use Starship. Yeah.
And Starship has a plugin for Kubernetes, so you can just have just the context, right? To know which cluster you're on. So in the case of the cluster lab, we actually modify the prompt to use the Starship prompt, so we have the Kubernetes context. It didn't make sense so far in the other labs because we're always on the same cluster. There's no specific context that is required, but maybe having the environment at some point would be useful. So I might want to change and add a pretty standardized prompt for all the labs. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely shout out to the folks who maintain Starship, because it's really nice. I use it in demos. If I want to show that I'm on two different clusters, I might customize the prompt to show the cluster name, or if I'm doing development, I'm usually using the Git plugins, so you can see things like what branch you're on, and it's really easy to kind of tweak it to what you want it to be and make it look nice. So
yeah,
thank you to the Starship folks. All right. I don't know if we want to work through this lab, or do you want to
we can keep going. So I mean, many of the actually getting started labs for Cilium are Star Wars inspired with application, and I'm sure many people have seen your demos, Liz, that involve some kind of API request between an X-Wing and the Death Star, as I recall from episode 4 or something. I'm sure that happened. And yeah, so that's what we have in here. So we deploy some manifest here, and it's pretty straightforward to go and paste all this, and you see the pods being created. And then we will test some basic connectivity between all the different pods, and some of the labs you can literally test the network policies between, again, ensuring that an X-Wing cannot talk to the Death Star, and then validating all of this, looking at Hubble as well to validate all the network flows. So all the good stuff that you would expect from Cilium, you can go and test it out with this platform.
I think we've got a kind of request on here. So at least our labs here are not showing that bookstore sample app from Google, which I know is very commonly used. I've got to admit, I have used that bookstore one myself once or twice in talks.
We have it, I think, in the Service Mesh lab, I think.
I think we do, yes. Maybe
which is essentially from your code. So
yeah, maybe we need to come up with a more space-themed bookstore or something. Yeah. So I wonder if we should come back to this question of why there's no way to go back after submitting a task. So I guess this is, if once you hit that green check button, do you have the option to go back to a previous stage? Assume that you passed it.
No, you can't actually in this mode. So there's two modes for Instruct Labs. There is a mode where you get invited to a lab and you can add it to your library and then play it, and then you can go back to previous stages. and there's a lab that is embedded, which is this version here. And so in the past, we used the option where you would add it to your library and then play it, but then it meant that people had an account, even if it was an anonymous account, and it was a bit harder to get started with this. And so now we're using the embedded version, and indeed it doesn't allow to go back with this. The other reason why we switched to the embedded version is that it allows to automate more things on our side, and specifically we're starting to add badges for the labs. Some of the labs at this point, the Getting Started doesn't have it at this point. And in order to do this, the only option with Instruct is to use embedded labs at this point.
Okay, and is that to do with checking that? I've brought up another question without meaning to yet. Come back to that. Sorry. Yeah. So this idea of badges, I think we'll come back to the badges, but I guess the idea is that in this mode, you have to step through step by step, and then we know when somebody has actually completed the whole lab. So that's a good point for awarding the badge.
Yeah.
Okay, so cool. I will show this question again now. So I was stuck on a question. I skipped the docs in the beginning and went, oh, okay. So you skipped over the reading material at the front.
Oh, that's not an issue, because if you go back to the step where you're at, if you click back on the lab, sorry, Nico, yeah, there's a little icon to the right corner here, yeah, and you can see the notes again for the current challenge.
Okay.
So if you skip the documentation, you can still see it here. Documentation, I mean, the notes from the beginning, because there's some explanation. Yeah, like here, for example, this is the setup for this lab. And if you skip this, you can still access it, actually. Yeah, maybe this is something we could make a little bit more obvious.
Yeah. And again, go back to a point you said, Raphaël, on how we can actually, if you don't have the time to complete an entire lab, you can, restart or skip to step 5 if you've already done step 1 to 4 on a Monday, go back a few days later and go skip straight to step 5 if you want to so you don't have to go and do it all over again.
No, that depends, actually. That only works if we've allowed skipping the challenges. Yeah. Which is not.
I wonder if that depends on which mode it is, because if you've got an account,
exactly.
Yeah.
So typically for the labs where we've activated the badges, we don't allow skipping, because there's a final challenge, which is kind of a little exam that you have to solve. If we allow skipping, there's no point.
That makes it too easy. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, what? Skip over the exam section? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that would be. So I think, Nico, you're also working on a BGP-oriented lab at the moment, and that had some extra challenges to set up, right?
Yeah, and it's still a work in progress. But again, the idea is to, if you think about how we can use BGP with Cilium today, and why you would want to use BGP, well, is to connect to your top of rack switches, right? So it's going to be quite costly to go and get ourselves some a data center for each online lab. So we are essentially recreating a virtual data center fabric environment with core, kind of spine leaf environment, and where we're using a platform called Container Lab, which enables us to build, using containerized environments and virtual machine to build virtual networks using open source platforms like FRR. And again, that's enabled us to replicate a BGP environment that the Cilium agents can go and talk to and peer with. It's a pretty cool platform, which is, again, Container Lab. You should just check it out if you're interested. And
we should add a link to the show notes for this, and also for Starship as well. I think we should shout out for that. So when you have this Container Labs, is that running in a separate virtual machine inside Instruct, or is that a container that represents the BGP network?
No, it will be running all within the same it's the same host essentially. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be a video coming out quite soon, hopefully, which I've just finished that will be on the Isovalent YouTube channel that explain the topology and the BGP configuration. So you should look out for that one. Just plugging in some content as I am here.
We've got a comment on, I think, the illustration we've got here of having two Death Star pods. It would be fun if the second one would be stuck in the container creating stage. Yeah, I don't know whether, can you have two Death Stars at the same time? I don't know. There should be some kind of...
No, the first one needs to be destroyed first, yeah.
I think so. Yes. All right, so maybe let's talk a little bit about like the summer school. I think, Raph, you mentioned the summer school briefly. Tell us a bit more about what's happening there and, the relationship to the labs.
Yeah, so it's an event that is organized this summer, as the name implies, by Isovalent. We had the first session, was it this week or last week already?
This week. Just this week.
It was this week. Oh my goodness.
There's been a lot happening this week.
It's been a long week. And we have the second event in 2 weeks and the third event on the 2nd of August. And the idea is several things, showcasing the new labs. So we have 2 labs per session. And the idea is that people can actually sign up and they can do a lab. And we have engineers that are here, so either technical marketing like Nico, or solutions architect like myself, people that know the labs and know Cilium and can help the participants if there's technical issues with the labs. So we have an introduction on the subject, present the different labs, and then we split into 2 virtual rooms, and everyone can choose the room where they go, which is specific for a specific lab. Some people actually had the time to do both labs, so if they're done with the lab, they can switch rooms and do the second one, or even do it after the workshop. I mean, these labs are accessible anyway online.
Great.
I've just put up the registration link. So the next one in 2 weeks will be about Tetragon and service mesh. So two hot topics.
Yeah. That's going to be a busy session, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're both running in parallel. Yeah, and if you do finish a service mesh lab early, you can actually jump on to doing the Tetragon as well. So
very nice. So what kind of feedback did you get after that first session?
No, it's been really good. Most people really appreciated the labs, the platform. Like I said, some people actually did both labs. Some people went on and actually did all the 6 labs that we have on the Isovalent labs page. So I think it's been really appreciated. What we're trying to do as well in the subjects that we have here is trying to have a balance between network and security subjects every time. So for the first one, we had network policies and cluster mesh. So more like security was network policies and cluster mesh being more the networking side. Second one is Tetragon for security and service mesh for networking, and in the beginning of August we'll have connectivity observability for the networking side, and this FDS, so essentially Tetragon Enterprise for the second part.
I was hoping there would be a mention of lost the ability to speak. I was hoping there would be a mention of observability here as well, but it sounds like we're talking about it in
there is the connectivity is essentially the service map and Hubble.
Great. Yeah. So you mentioned this upcoming session that's going to have service mesh and Tetragon labs. Are those labs available yet? Can people do those labs?
The Tetragon lab is actually available, and it's been publicized before. It pretty much came out along with the book, right? With Natalie and Jet's book. And the service mesh lab is not public yet. It will probably be made public around the summer school session, maybe a few days before or the day before.
Okay, so maybe that summer school is going to be a pretty good way of getting an early look at that lab and being one of the first to try that. But obviously, if you're following Isovalent or probably any one of us on Twitter, you'll hear about the launch of that lab as well.
Most likely.
That'll be great to see. Yeah. So what else is going to be coming in the labs? What's the future for labs?
Well, the future is in the hands of the audience, right? We want to give folks the opportunity to suggest ideas, whether they want some integration with Prometheus and Grafana, building security policies for gRPC, troubleshooting guides for Cilium. We are open to create any labs around Cilium and Hubble and Tetragon. We just after some feedback from attendees and participants in the labs.
And what would be a good way of giving that feedback or asking for a particular lab? I guess reaching out on the Cilium Slack would be one option.
Sure. Twitter.
Twitter's
good with that. Twitter handles as well, as you can see them here.
I guess we'll take comments on the eCHO YouTube page as well. That's also
yeah,
sure, that works. So if you have suggestions, if there's subjects you'd like to see in the labs, yeah, sure, let us know.
Fantastic.
We're currently working besides the BGP lab that Nico is working on. I started working on the host firewall lab, and besides this, at the moment, it's also adding quizzes and exam challenges to the existing labs, so we can roll out the badges for all of them as well.
Yeah, we should probably just talk a little bit about the badges. So this is going to allow people to show off the fact that they've completed these different labs and show off their Cilium knowledge.
Exactly, yeah.
So they get a badge and they can put that onto their LinkedIn profile, things like that. Yeah,
so it'd be like an online badging platform with finalizing the details at the moment. So the people that have taken so far the 2 labs that have the final exam, which is cluster mesh and network policies, enterprise network policies, we have them on a list somewhere. So whenever the badges are ready, we can issue them. And eventually, when the labs are put together, it will be an automatic process within, I expect, a few days to maximum a few weeks, a couple of weeks.
Yeah. And those will cover open source, not just enterprise, right? I mean,
both.
Badges yeah. Interesting suggestion here from Bojanche again about it would be nice to remove the certification check so that we could open source the labs. I guess we should think about whether it's possible to structure it so that we could have some of the setup in a repo, even if we don't have all the the exam questions side of things public. If we could do that, that would be pretty nice, actually.
Yeah, this is something we've thought about already.
Yeah. Okay.
And really the hard part, everything is already in a Git repository, and the hard part really is separating that Git repository from potentially the final exam, which is linked to the badging system, which obviously we don't want to open source, because if we open source the answers, well, there's no point in actually having a certificate, right?
Yeah. Well, we should have a think about whether there's some way we could split that, or at least allow some of the basic kind setup to be shared. And, maybe people could contribute new labs, which would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So if you're out there and you have questions for Nico and Raph, please start typing them in pretty quick, because I'm sure while we have them available, we'd love to answer questions. I think also one idea for a lab that Raph, you mentioned you were considering is the life of a packet.
Yeah, that's right. So from Duffy's last eCHO episode last week, I was watching it and I'm like, hey, this is nice. It could be a nice advanced lab, actually following where the packets are being routed in Cilium in an advanced lab. So that's something I'm considering for a future lab. Yeah.
That would be pretty good advanced lab, actually. If folks didn't already see that episode, it was last week, eCHO episode 51, I believe. And yeah, thoroughly recommend it if you want to get an insight into what's happening under the covers as packets traverse through Cilium. Tracy's joined us. Hi, Tracy. And she says it's a great workshop. I guess she means the summer school workshop, I think.
You were there.
So wonderful.
But
all right. Anything else that we haven't covered about the labs that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, I suggest that maybe one other thing we'd like to do would be some kind of capture the flag. If we were to do some kind of fun experiments with some challenge, maybe, rewarding people with some swags, and have people doing the labs at the same time, and either the first people to get the flag or complete them. Again, to really turn the experience of learning into kind of gamified version of it.
Yeah, I wonder if we could use some of the capture the flags that we built for last year's eBPF summit as the basis for something.
That could be interesting.
Yeah, that would be pretty nice. We've got another person who said hello. Hi, Walid. Nice to have you with us. So I love that idea, actually, having a CTF lab. I think that would be wonderful. Okay, so anything else that you wanted to add? Okay, I think we covered it. So I guess I managed to just briefly mention the eBPF Summit again. So if anybody missed at the beginning, the eBPF Summit is going to be taking place in September on the 28th and 29th. And we would love you to join us at that event. So registration's open. If you go to ebpf.io/summit-2022. In fact, you'll find the link on the ebpf.io homepage. Hello to Akil as well. And Bojan Cho saying gamification always works. I think that's absolutely true. It's a really good way of learning things.
Anything.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you so much to the two of you for joining us and giving us an overview of the labs. If you're watching and you haven't already, I highly recommend going and trying out these labs and, send feedback our way and, let us know what other labs you'd like to see, or let us know if you have any issues or questions about those labs. So with that said, I think it's time to wrap up. Thanks, everyone, for joining us from all around the world. And we will see you again on next week's episode of eCHO. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.